Well, folks, I hate to say it, but the jihadis are at it again. I'm still following the very slow withdrawal of American troops from northern Syria. There supposedly weren't that many troops there to begin with, and of course, any troop presence there was always illegal, considering that not only did the U.S. Congress never approve troops being deployed in Syria, they outright voted against it when Obama was president. They passed a resolution opposing any U.S. troop deployment to Syria. But of course, that's all ancient history now, and no one really cares. The important thing, though, is that these troops that are there, that were never supposed to be there, are coming out slowly, very slowly. For some reason, there are still U.S. troops way up near the Turkish border. Most of the troops that have pulled back have either gone to Iraq or have retreated into the Syrian oil fields because, of course, as I've discussed, I think at least twice, yesterday being one of those days, the U.S. doesn't want to let anyone get the Syrian oil. We are there to take the oil because that's what freedom's all about. And if you disagree, well, then, in the words of George W. Bush, you hate our freedom. But anyway, enough about that. I've talked about the Syrian oil fields enough recently. What I want to talk about today is the latest dust-up between the U.S. troops and the what was formerly called the Free Syrian Army, now is called the Syrian National Army. But what in practice is neither a free army or a national army, but is in fact a loose coalition of roving jihadist militias. And these people are sort of the ground troops of the Turks in northern Syria, as it were. These are mostly guys who, were in Turkey because they were Syrian refugees that fled across the border and were set up in these camps and have been trained by the Turkish military to go into northern Syria and fight to, reclaim the Kurdish lands there. And so we've got these guys, out on the streets, along with the Russians, the Syrian Arab Army, the Army of Assad, and the United States Army. All of these forces are, on the same roads, patrolling the same areas, and trying not to get into fights with one another. But I guess the FSA guys just couldn't resist, and they ended up firing on some Americans. They fired on a whole convoy of U.S. soldiers, apparently. Now, of course, didn't really do much because the U.S. has all those armored vehicles now, the MRAPs. We aren't in the early 2000s anymore. There's none of these open Humvees anymore. And so, this was more of a symbolic attack, it would seem. If they just were firing some rifle rounds at them, you're not going to do much, but you are, sending the signal that, hey, you're not welcome here. And frankly, I would think that, the Americans probably already knew that. They certainly aren't, welcomed by the Turks. The Turks don't want them there. They don't want, because they're buddies with those Kurds. And another thing, the Turks don't really want the Americans around because the Turks and the FSA want to run the show. They don't want these stuffy Americans crowding out the joint. Erdogan and his guys, they're there to resettle some Syrian refugees. They want to inject a bunch of Arabs into this area. And, the Americans have really outlived their welcome. As far as the Turks see it, they've grabbed this territory. They're in control now. Sure, the Russians and the SAA are there, but it's only a matter of time, I guess, in Erdogan's mind and before he finds a way to get them out of there, even though I've said in the past I don't think that's happening. I think that the Turkey's reached a high water mark as far as their influence in northern Syria goes. I don't think that now that the Russians and the SAA are there, that they're going to let the Turks assert any more dominance. So this attack on the U.S. really doesn't mean much in the long term, I don't think. It's more of a symbolic gesture. They're just, they're probably frustrated because, this is a really terrible situation. because nothing good for any side, really, I guess, is going to come out of this. Now, I don't think that things are going to turn into a horrible mess and some big quagmire like the Bosnian War or something. I don't think that we're going to see anything like that. But there's a stalemate here without any shot being fired. But all sides understand that they don't want to get into a conflict with one another. And so these FSA guys who have trained for years to, join the jihad in Syria, now that they're finally there, they're kind of, handicapped. They don't feel like they can do anything. They're impotent. And so they're just throwing a temper tantrum by, firing some shots towards the Americans. Now, the Pentagon isn't even acknowledging this incident so far. The only reason why we know that this happened is because the Russian Ministry of Defense is reporting that it, in fact happened, and they would know since there are Russian troops all around there, just like there are Americans all around there. There aren't, this isn't like post-war Germany where there are, areas, zones of occupation. This isn't like Berlin or Austria, which I think Austria was also divided after World War II. Anyway, let's not talk about that. The point is that you've got all these different forces, commingling in northern Syria right now, and even though things like this might happen, you might have somebody with an itchy trigger finger, shoot at the other guy. I think that the heads of the heads of state are cool enough to make sure that nothing bad really happens with all this. Not Erdogan, nor Putin, nor Assad, nor Trump have anything to gain from starting a war with any of the other parties here. And so I think that things will continue to maybe not de-escalate, but just sort of simmer and maybe go stale. Maybe that's a good word for it. I think that this situation will become quite stale. Like a stalemate, which it already is. I guess that's the same root, isn't it? Isn't that fun when you learn something new about the English language? Stale isn't stale bread and stalemate. I'll have to look that up later, but it sounds to me like those two things are connected. So anyway, if you get anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.